I think Chaitanya, we can get everyone's video also on to just take one photo op moment with both the panels together.
Sure, that would be good. I think, hold on, I'm just ensuring we have everyone here for session one. Ms. Kunjan Krishna, Mr. Navanil Das, Ms. Jaybhati, Mr. Siddharth, if you guys could also turn on your videos real quick so that we can just say hello. Madhav, are you able to speak now?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
I think we still, Siddharth, are you there?
Yes, Pawan, I'm right here. I'm just getting out of another meeting. I'll just turn on my video right after. I'm just finishing up another meeting.
Sure. We have about 70 participants that have joined already. I do think more will be joining in the next couple of minutes. Yeah, I mean, that was the first housekeeping. The only other thing is once we get the session going, which we'll be doing shortly in a minute or so, request everyone to stay muted unless they are speaking and then to unmute yourselves. But otherwise, I think we can get started. Thank you everyone for joining this session on ensuring a just transition from the ICE vehicles to the EV industry, as well as ensuring the appropriate skill development to take place. We think this is a very vital topic to be having this conversation on today, where as we start our transition in earnest, going up to almost 5% EV penetration in many regions and higher. So it is high time we start thinking about what that workforce transition looks like. And so we are having this webinar today. And I would like to hand off to Mr. Madhav Pai, the Executive Director for the Cities Program at WRI-India and the Acting CEO of WRI-India in a few weeks to please say a few words.
Thanks a lot, Chaitanya, and welcome to all of you. So, in India, I mean, just, transport is the third most CO2 emitting sector, right? And 90% of these emissions are from road transport. So I think the big sort of the decarbonization opportunity for the transport sector is quite important, right? And that it has the potential to reduce almost 1 billion ton of carbon footprint by 2030, right? And India, so we know Indian government has basically through its various policies is promoting decarbonization of transport, and electric mobility has been a major push. We've seen the move towards electric vehicles in a big way, and this is actually transforming the auto sector and the transport sector in very, very sort of pertinent ways, especially the manufacturing and employment landscape is changing a lot and will change more dramatically as we transition to this whole sort of electric vehicle world. And so with EV, the EV ecosystem is not, it's not sort of working with one stakeholder or one ministry. I mean, to get this sort of EV ecosystem going, then we all recognize that there is a need for a coordinated effort across different stakeholders, public and private sector, across ministries, also, new finance, etc., that will be required. So recognizing all of this under the leadership of NITI Aayog, WRI-India and partners, we launched the Forum for Decarbonizing Transport as part of the NDC-Transport Initiative for Asia. So this is the NDCTIA project. So today's discussion essentially is organized to talk about this just transition and skill development in the EV industry. So we are going to see this sort of transition to EVs. How do we make sure that we do it in a just way, and also make sure that given the scale at which we want to produce electric vehicles, the ambition that is there, how do we make sure that the skills that are required and the workforce that is required for that to happen is happen. So today we are basically going to have two conversations. The first talk is really more on just transition in electric mobility, and the second one is more around skill development in the automotive and transport industry. So yeah, again, we believe this is like an important moment. I think just what we have seen with the electric bus, the recent sort of e-bus tenders, and how the price that has been that the sort of price discovery has resulted in price lower than diesel, and we're immediately seeing such a large requirement for electric buses coming in the country. So similarly, we are seeing a big uptake in two-wheelers, three-wheelers. So clearly, I think the demand is there. I think the production has to meet that demand, and we need to really have the workforce that is required. So with that, welcome again, everyone. And I would now invite Dr. O.P. Agarwal, CEO of WRI-India, to give us a keynote address for this conversation.
Thanks, Madhav, and thanks everyone. Lovely to see so many friends on this. It's really good to see all of you. Frankly, Madhav has given a very good background to this. There isn't very much I could add, but just sort of stretching the same argument that he was making. We for a long time been talking about climate change and what actions need to be taken to bring down the adverse impacts of climate change. Well, all these negotiations that have taken place, commitments that have happened, various actions are on towards mitigating carbon emissions or looking at resilience. Thing that seemed to have been missing in all those conversations till quite recently was whether all these transitions are going to have an adverse impact on some set of the people. While it may create opportunities for others, are there adverse impacts on some people? And how do we mitigate the adverse impacts on those people? And how do we create the kind of skill sets needed for the new actions that are coming up? And electric mobility is actually a great area to look at how we deal with these kinds of problems. As I see it, there are multiple areas where there may be job losses. One could be in the vehicle maintenance segment. You have so many of these motor garages which are taking up a lot of repairs, and a lot of that is likely to come down because the number of parts in electric vehicles is far fewer. Maintenance requirements are a lot less. That is one. Second is a whole ecosystem of petroleum fuel exploration, refining, distribution. All of that is, again, a large area of employment that is there for people, particularly the distribution segment. That is going to be replaced by a similarly wide network of charging infrastructure, power generation, charging, a whole lot of those things, battery management systems, battery disposal systems, battery mining systems. So those need a completely new set of skills that will come into the market. But how do we make sure that people who are going to lose their jobs find alternative employment or are able to reskill themselves to fill in the new areas that are going to come up? I think it's a thing that needs a lot more deeper work. What exactly is the magnitude of job losses? What exactly are the new skills that will come up? What will be the quantum of new skills that will be needed? How many people will be needed? What is the possibility of transferring one skill to the other? I think that is a big skill, a big exercise that needs to be done. And unless this is done, there is a risk that the adverse social impacts may create pressures politically to slow down what we are doing. So I think that it is really important for us as a community to do this kind of an exercise. This is not just about electric vehicles. I even think in terms of if you are replacing thermal power plants with decentralized renewable energy plants, it again means a very different kind of job. It needs decentralized jobs. The people who lose jobs in concentrated thermal power plants are at one location. The decentralized jobs that are going to come up through solar parks is going to be decentralized. So how do you match these two? So I think this whole idea of just transition has picked up traction. I think it needs a lot of work to be done into getting into the ground, looking at numbers, analyzing what kind of gaps are there, what new skills are needed. And that's, I think, an exercise that is extremely important. Madhav also mentioned, and very rightly so, that the whole game of electric mobility cuts across multiple ministries in the existing framework of the government system. And there was a need, and honestly, I did not see one dominant ministry for that. So it was right on the government's part to assign it to the NITI Aayog. NITI Aayog has played a very important leadership role, which has enabled electric mobility to scale up. I think this is another aspect that the NITI Aayog should also take up, maybe bringing in other concerned ministries into the whole game of looking at the social impacts of this whole transition. So I don't want to really say much more, but I think I'm really happy that an event like this focused on just transitions is being held. These kinds of discussions enable more and more discussion to happen, and that's what leads to a lot more action in that kind of a direction. So let me stop with that. Thanks, Madhav. Thanks, Chaitanya. And thanks, everyone else, for getting me into this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, OP sir. I'd now like to invite Mr. Siddharth Sinha, the Officer on Special Duty at the CEO's office in NITI Aayog, to say a few words on behalf of me.
Thank you so much, Chaitanya, and thank you so much, Madhav and Dr. OP. It's always so good to hear from you and see you. And just as we are discussing about just transition in one field, we're also parallelly working on individual level behavior change, and Dr. OP would know about it very well, and WRI is partnering there also with us. So it's really interesting to see increased participation that we are witnessing from WRI side in terms of. Before I move on to the bit about just transition and skilling, or the topics for today's webinar, I would really like to thank WRI for helping us conceptualize, the stakeholder platform for decarbonizing transport. Because what was really required, was this one forum which will bring together stakeholders from across the spectrum, and we have been able to do that, and rather WRI has been able to do that. And it's so good to see that, because now this is the second event. The first one, was financing for decarbonizing transport. So it's so good that we've had isolated events in the past. We've had isolated webinars in the past. We've had different meetings in the past. But for the first time, we really have this official established forum where we can, bring sort of stakeholders, whether these are private, whether these are government, whether these are state governments. And it's really exciting to see the kind of participation that we are witnessing. And therefore, when we talk about just transition, and thanks so much for bringing to the fore this issue of just transition, because we often talk about, the transition, but the part that is really missing is the justice. Fine, it's great to completely switch to a new field, but what happens with all the resources who were really employed in that field? And as Dr. OP was, rightly talking about, Dr. OP mentioned that, we have to, these people either have to reorient their skills, or, they have to find alternate employments. But I think one of the most beautiful things which the transport sector offers us, which other sectors such as power may not be able to offer us in terms of just transition, is also the ability of self-employment. So when we are talking about the skills development and the just transition here, one very interesting aspect in transport, because of all these models of clean mobility, etc., which we talk about, is also our ability to actually, sort of push for these skills which lead to self-employment, whether it's mobility, whether it's in terms of mobility as a form of service, whether with these massive tenders for 5,000 plus e-buses in the country, there's going to be a lot of opportunities that are going to exist. And we must make the most out of these opportunities. And for that, it's really important that we have to get the numbers correct. Without the numbers, without the estimates, all plans at this level, would only sound hollow. And that's why we need stakeholders across the spectrum, whether these are central, whether these are state governments. And the need really is to get together everybody and understand that, okay, if this is the road, if this is the way forward, and if this is the roadmap, these are all the considerations that we have to consider. These are the potential jobs which would need to either transition, or people who would need to be sort of reskilled, or people who can find alternate forms of employment. So we need to have these numbers. And for that, We have to get together everybody onto the same platform. Dr. OP spoke about the power plants. I think all of us would remember that, when the Badarpur power plant in Delhi was actually shut down, we suddenly had so many people, who were not even left, with jobs. And here, and of course, here the advantage, of course, of having the foresight is that, when you have foresight, when you have a plan for the future, you really would be able to, plan for what happens going forward. So I think the need of the hour is to assess and forecast what is going to happen. And when in the process of drawing up that roadmap, also ensuring that while we reskill people, we are also able to ensure that not even a single person is left behind, from reaping the benefits of that transition. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been just, because today, even if a single person loses their job and doesn't get another job, while we may, pride ourselves in having introduced a completely different field, in essence, we've actually taken away livelihood for somebody. So we hope that through this and through our discussions today, we would be able to, learn a lot more in terms of what the future steps are. And thank you once again for using a common platform, which is the Forum for Decarbonizing Transport, to actually galvanize these views. And my only suggestion would be that, like the last time we had this webinar on financing for decarbonizing transport, I think what we should now start doing is to publish, these sort of findings, and so that they then make their ways into the policy ecosystem. So we should also look at all of this as a form of a stakeholder consultation, where the government gets to hear the views of so many of the stakeholders involved. And with that, I'd just like to thank you once again for having me and having this session. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Siddharth, for those words and for the leadership role that NITI has been taking in pushing forward these important topics. And definitely, with the kind of people we have that are joining us today, I think it's very important that we actually capture these inputs and put them out there so that they actually get taken up in the policy-making process. So thank you once again. With that, we will be starting with our first session. And just to set a bit of context for this first session, we will be making a very quick presentation that will kind of provide an overview of the ecosystem, the automotive and transport ecosystem today, and set the stage for the conversation that will follow. I hope you're able to see my screen. All right, so just starting right off, right? India is the fourth largest automaker in the world. We produce about 25 to 30 million vehicles annually, of which about 20% or 15 to 20% are exported. The automotive sector, we know, accounts for about 7% of India's GDP and 49% of India's manufacturing GDP. So it's really a bellwether and a core industrial sector in generating jobs and economic growth in the country. It employs about 35 million people, and there are plans to make it more ambitious. The Automotive Mission Plan that was released aims to make the auto sector the third largest in the world by 2026, and accounting for 12% of India's GDP and 60 million jobs. So in order to actually achieve this, while also accounting for the transition from ICE vehicles to EV, is something that requires some thought. So if we dive down into the figures of the production, we see that two-wheelers, no surprise, are the biggest segment that are manufactured in India, followed by passenger vehicles. And you can see the production volumes have been growing consistently until FY19, the financial year 2019, after which they dropped due to various factors, including some sluggish demand, the transition to BS6, as well as the coronavirus pandemic. If we look at the exports, again, two-wheelers do comprise a major chunk of our exports, and passenger vehicles comprise the second largest chunk, followed by three-wheelers. So how other countries are transitioning plays an equally important role in terms of how our automobile sector will fare and how healthy it will be. And being responsive to those other shifts as well as domestic demand will be critical in ensuring that we keep up with the times and increase our market share rather than reducing it going forward. A very quick look at the component sector. If you zoom into that, when you're looking at automobile manufacturing, you can see that the component sales domestically and in terms of exports, you have engine components, drive transmission and transmission components and others, which are actually part of the ICE vehicle ecosystem, but will not be a part of the EV ecosystem, form a major chunk of our sales as well as our production and exports. So again, even from the component level, we're going to need to start retooling, reskilling, and ensuring that we're prepared to transition. And if you look at employment in the sector, we had a big number, 35 million. How does that break up, right? So manufacturing accounts for 4 to 5 million of that, and a big chunk goes to actually road transport. What does road transport comprise of? Your commercial drivers for passenger as well as goods transport, your station attendants, your gas station attendants and other folks, as well as certain service folks and for smaller repairs and smaller maintenance that is not formalized. So all of this goes into this huge mammoth sector that's going to that's largely informal as well, that's self-employed, which offers a lot, as Siddharth was saying, and it offers a lot of opportunities as well as a lot of risks in terms of how to ensure that they are well skilled for the transition. And if you look at so that was an overview of the automotive sector in India, right? But if you look at the trends that are now affecting that employment as well as the economic growth of the sector, you see that it's not just electrification. There are policy and regulatory interventions like the BS6 and CAFE norms, which we were just speaking about, the growth of automation and IoT in industry in general, as well as the changing market demand towards more shared mobility, towards more smart and connected vehicles, which are also having impacts on employment and economic growth and our need to keep up and keep evolving. But electrification, of course, is one of the strong factors. It has components of policy and regulatory interventions. It has components of changing market demand as well. And it brings with it changes in the vehicle component composition, manufacturing processes, as well as after sales and maintenance requirements. So if we do now actually look at electrification, we're going to see obviously that jobs in the automotive sector will change with the EV transition. There will be the emergence of new jobs, existing jobs will perish. Some or many jobs will continue, but they will also change in nature. And these changes won't take place evenly across the board, like OP sir was saying. You're going to find that there are certain segments, like the two-wheeler segments, which are transitioning drastically much faster than others, where you're going to see a faster transition and higher impacts in the shorter term. You see regions which were automotive hubs, manufacturing hubs, which need to look at keeping up and keeping up with the competition a lot more. And you're going to see specific subsectors of the industry, like specific components, vehicle servicing, which is going to change a lot more than others. Now, if you look at the automotive, so now we spoke about a bunch of things, right? So now if you actually look at what that automotive value chain looks like, this is the standard automotive value chain for us. You have your raw materials to suppliers, to OEM, to dealerships, to customers, which is that sort of central production line you're seeing here. You see, you have your services and spare parts, which is another line here, and you have your fuel pumps and other services coming in from here. Now, if you look at the EV value chain, as a quick glimpse, this is sort of a rough mapping that we've done for ourselves. You can see that the battery production value chain adds a significant component here in the production, manufacturing itself. And you have here, instead of fuel pumps, you have a whole ecosystem of charging station operators, which is going to have different impacts on what kind of jobs are actually supported by that ecosystem. Now, if you look, here it just says raw material suppliers to OEM, right? But what does that mean? That's where a lot of changes are hidden in the manufacturing ecosystem. So if you see the ICE powertrain, the powertrain of the ICE vehicle, you see that it is kind of distributed in terms of value across engines, transmission, exhaust, control injection systems. But if you look at the electric vehicle powertrain, you see that a lot of that value actually gets concentrated in the battery pack and BMS, with a little bit going to the EV motor. And the thing that is a little bit of concern, but is also a big point of opportunity, is that we do not have the same level of indigenization in EV components as we do in ICE components, naturally. So if you see on the left, you see that most of our ICE vehicles are localized at least 85%. So actually greater than 90% in most cases, but minimum 85%. If you look at the localization level for EV components, we find that yes, the chassis and body being largely drawn from the ICE vehicle industry is already high in terms of the current localization level, if you look at that. But all the others at the moment are low. And this is slightly dated, and this sector is changing rapidly. So this has changed already since last year with the PLI schemes that have come. But you can also see that the localization potential has a wide range. It can range from slightly lower to slightly more ambitious target points. And while all of our policy frameworks are lining up to ensure that we hit ambitious localization targets, ensuring that the workforce is prepared and ready to enable this to happen will be critical for this, for us to be able to manage that high level of indigenization. And that was manufacturing. Very quickly, if we look at dealerships and if we look at transport sector, you do have other areas where other equations coming in. For example, servicing requirements at the sales and dealership and after sales level are likely to be lower. Finance and insurance requirements may be higher, given that people will want packages, will want more financing to deal with this new type of technology. But at the same time, making that financing available will be a part of the bottleneck to ensure that employment generation is also not affected in that space. Similarly, used car sales will take time to pick up as residual values ascertained and battery as a service starts picking up. Front-end sales, there might be changes in how front-end sales are managed from a dealership model to a more of an online and offline direct-to-consumers model. And all of these could have certain impacts and need to be continuously monitored, tracked, and studied to see how trends are shaping up. In the interest of time, I won't go into what the impacts at the service level might be with EV drivers, with chargers, with the fuel pumps going down, and a lot of employment currently being generated at fuel pumps and how that will be impacted. But needless to say, there will be strong impacts here as well. So finally, just to sort of open up that discussion, what we understand by just transition is that it seeks to ensure that the substantial benefits of the green economy transition are shared widely, and to ensure that no one is left behind, like the keynote speakers have said before. So with that as context, I would like to open the discussion for session 1, and I request all session 1 speakers to please turn on your cameras and we can get started. Can we also change the view to the view of all panelists for session 1, please, with the videos on? All right. So just to get started, I'd like to start with Mr. Jayashanjan. Mr. Jayashanjan, the Telangana EV policy emphasizes the potential of creating jobs and attracting investments in EV manufacturing. So what is the opportunity that you see for job creation from the EV sector in Telangana?
See, as earlier speakers pointed out, there is a diverse range of jobs. And because the EV sector has multiple components, it is a large number of jobs are there in the manufacturing bit of EVs, both the OEMs, components, as well as storage systems. But there are also large number of jobs related to, let us say, the charging infrastructure. We are not speaking much about it, but there are lots of R&D jobs also. In fact, there are still certain parts of the EV ecosystem where much advancement in knowledge is still taking place. For example, we are aware about the battery chemistry. We have seen in the recent past some incidents of batteries kind of overheating, malfunctioning, and therefore there's a requirement of higher levels of research in what is the best composition of advanced cell chemistry that will suit our climatic conditions, our extreme hot weather particularly. Similarly, we also know, again, people spoke about it a while ago, about the recycling and safe disposal of electronic waste. We all know that there is a huge unorganized and traditional sector which looks after electronic waste. Now, there'll be so much of batteries as well, electric batteries as well, which will be adding to that. waste, and how does one take care of scientific and safe disposal of that waste, and how do you use that waste in a way in which normally, as the phrase goes, wealth from waste. So how are you able to generate wealth? So as is clear, the range of jobs that can be created, including entrepreneurial jobs. It is not just organized sector jobs. There are lots of entrepreneurial possibilities. New enterprises can be created around everything. And as is also quite clear, the range is very diverse. You have, for instance, when I spoke about R&D requirements, that requires maybe PhD kind of skills, PhD kind of expertise and knowledge. And obviously, not everyone will possess those kind of skills. But at the same time, let us say the batteries recycling, batteries collection, and so on. That requires, you don't need to be very educated. And already, as I said, there's a traditional sector which is employed in those kind of activities. But how do you kind of reorient them, reskill them, organize them better? That is a possibility. For entrepreneurship as well, there are multiple opportunities. In Hyderabad, for example, we have started witnessing very interesting models of battery swapping stations. As you know, for auto rickshaws, which are the most popular modes of public transport in this city, in the city of Hyderabad, to be able to have ready to use or ready to deploy batteries is very critical. They cannot afford to keep the station, keep the vehicle stationary, keep the vehicle parked, and then you are charging. So battery swapping stations are very good opportunities. And again, this is an opportunity where entrepreneurs can really come in. They can set up these stations. In fact, someone has tried out a model through which the existing grocery stores in Hyderabad, these are called Kirana stores. Kirana stores can become the points where this battery swapping, etc., can happen. So there's no doubt about it that large number of jobs are available. You spoke about the policy that Telangana has. So Telangana, by the way, has a very comprehensive kind of policy. It speaks about how do you, first of all, create demand for electric vehicles, what is to be done by the public transportation system to create a sense of confidence so that private owners can also transition into EVs from ICE. It also provides support to manufacturers. And again, as I said, all kinds of manufacturing, not just the vehicles per se, but also components, also charging infrastructure. And it speaks about R&D and innovation. In fact, we are one of the few states which has already started working with lots of knowledge-focused institutions. For instance, in Hyderabad, we have a DRDO institution called ARCI, which works a lot in metallurgy, metals, etc. And they have come up with a very interesting kind of a chemistry composition, which is called LHP, which is a kind of a advanced version of mere lithium ions. And some of these challenges posed by hot weather in India, they claim that their chemistry is able to take care of it. So lots of such possibilities of identifying new areas where new generation jobs can be created are there. And if there is a policy support and an institutional wherewithal to encourage people or to channelize the energies of and the talent of people into this sector. So that way also in Telangana, we have one advantage. We have a government institution which is called TASK, the Telangana Academy of Skills and Knowledge. And the whole purpose of TASK, in fact, just 2 days from today, that is on 2nd June, TASK will complete 8 years of its formation, and along with the state, of course. And one of the remarkable things which TASK has achieved is the ability to foresee what kind of jobs are going to come relatively, in what numbers and in what kind of areas or catchment can you develop that kind of a talent where these jobs will be suitable. So I'm very confident that to support the ambitions that we have in our EV policy, EV and ESS policy, we will have the wherewithal to create a good number of skill sets and help them find both organized sector job opportunities as well as become EV entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ranjan. Mr. Jayesh Ranjan is the Principal Secretary of Industries and Commerce as well as IT at the Government of Telangana, and the Industries Department has been the one leading the EV policy in Telangana. So his overview of the total different initiatives that Telangana is undertaking is a fairly comprehensive one that is being led from the front, as I can attest to. I'd now like to turn to Ms. Gunjan Krishna, who is the Industries Commissioner in the government of Karnataka, to understand what, hello Ms. Gunjan, and how is Karnataka approaching the job creation opportunity of the EV sector vis-a-vis other states? Do you see the opportunity for, to leverage certain strengths that Karnataka already has to maybe specialize in certain areas of the EV sector? Over to you, Ms. Gunjan.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So what we are witnessing is a huge shift from ICE to the electric vehicle. And this paradigm shift will involve, changes at every aspect. So policy changes, if we talk about, Karnataka was the first state to come out with the EV policy. And now we have updated our policy also to ensure that we create an ecosystem for the growth of the industry. And as a result, if you see, the highest number of the sales of the EV vehicles happens in Karnataka. And we also had the first, the EV car that came out, Reva, early 2000, that also came out from Karnataka. As a result, we have around 45 plus startups and other companies that we are working. So the approach of the Karnataka government has always been, as I mentioned, to create the ecosystem. The ecosystem will have many building blocks. One of the building blocks, as you mentioned, would be, how we can ensure that there is a employment opportunity and there is a skill availability. For that, what we have done is, like for a cluster approach we are following, we have created a working group. For this, we have created a working group that is looking at that what kind of skill sets are required, because we would be having a huge displacement in time to come. As per the report that has come out recently, around 1 crore of jobs will be created in India by 2030. Now, these jobs will be not the same which we are presently seeing in the automotive industry, because the automotive industry had mostly mechanical and then servicing sectors and the others. We may be looking at 20 to 40% decrease in that sector, and then likewise there would be an increase in the EV sector. Now, what are the increases and the areas that we are looking at? Of course, manufacturing, where we are looking at EV manufacturing, we are looking at charging infrastructure creation, manufacturing of charging stations, and the creation of the infrastructure that would definitely be requiring. But apart from that, what we are looking at majorly electrical and electronics. We are looking at a lot more number of data analysts. We are looking at, how the recycling and the entire ecosystem that would again be, so there would be a lot of requirement of, or the battery engineers we would be requiring. So this would be a different skill set. We had looking at that how we can upskill and reskill a lot of people who are already working in the automotive industry. So there is a working group that is working there. Also to look at it, how we can align the existing industries, say in electronics and electrical and all of that, and software part of it, the analytics part of it, to work very closely with the EV sector. So that is number one. We are approaching it both from the demand side and the supply side. And what we are looking at it is from the supply side. If we look at it, we are looking at all our polytechnics and all our ITIs that we have. We have around 2,000 of them present in Karnataka. And we are working closely with Tata Technologies, with the Siemens and other, to evolve the curriculum. And these curriculum are being evolved with the help of the industry so that we can introduce them so that the skill set is ready when they are required. And also to give a fill-up to employment opportunity, because a lot of things are now getting automated. For that, we are asking, we are coming out with an employment policy, and we are asking the industry that if you employ a little more at these sites, then you will be getting little more in subsidy or little more of, incentive. That is how we are trying to work out. And in the end, as we say, the whole idea is, to ensure that the right skill sets are available. We are working at it, and we'll be very happy to work with the groups here also to evolve the right strategy. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Krishna. I think those points are excellent. Both from Mr. Jayesh and yourself, you've emphasized the skill development frameworks that the states already have and how you can leverage them. And I think that is going to be a very important part of ensuring that this transition is ready. Now, Pavan is the director of Clean Tech and Energy Systems at WRI, at New Energy. Pavan, states can leverage the e-mobility transition to create more jobs and economic growth. We've seen this. And we see that Telangana and Karnataka are certainly on this mission. But at the macro level, what are likely to be the net impacts on jobs of the e-mobility transition in India, across India?
No, I think at WRI also we have laid the framework of the transition, right, in terms of what are the jobs that are going to be lost, what are the jobs that are going to be created. But I also wanted to touch upon something that Madhav also talks about, that the kind of technology we are talking about in the battery ecosystem, there are 2-3 things that we need. One is, there are 2 sets of jobs that we are going to see, right? One is the niche jobs, which will be more R&D related, because we really need to explore more in the battery technology and, the BMS, everything related to batteries, related to from recycling, from the entire value chain for batteries. So I think there is a big opportunity there for really creating this niche jobs, which are very close to our city centers. We are not able to see that these jobs will be like your typical manufacturing, which will really go in tier 2 or tier 3 or very far away, but this will be pretty much in your mega cities around in the periphery. So how do we really enable that to happen is one. Then you have this jobs at scale, which will require a lot of technicians, lot of, your whole in the downstream of the value chain, where you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of change in the value chain. How are we going to have them transition? Because I think there is an EV skill development which will be needed there, right? Which is obviously we're going to touch upon in next session. So we are actually dealing with these 2 parallel things. And the question is, in both this, how do we really ensure that we are able to retrain, and how are we going to attract new talent? I think we have a double whammy in the sense that we need to actually do both of them simultaneously, because focusing on one or the other may actually lead to us becoming extremely a service oriented industry in the EV if we end up doing only jobs at the very downstream. But if we really want to talk India as a leader in terms of the electric mobility context, we really need to see how do we ensure, and we're not talking about only the lithium technology, right? We're talking about the entire new technologies that are going to come in the next 10 to 15 years in India. How do we really ensure that we are able to retain those kind of talent? We are really talking about the need for, PhDs, we need to researchers. Mr. Jayesh Ranjan was also talking about that we will see a lot of jobs in the R&D transition also through this EV transition. I think, how do we create that balance? And that's where I feel policies which really encourage both, and the whole urban planning, and how do we make our cities very competitive and attractive to really attain this is needed. The other parties of the skill development, I'm sure Mr. Munjal and others will really talk about the EV skill development aspects and what SME and others are also doing. But we really need to see how do we really focus on these 2 opportunities more than, I would say they are challenges, but at the same time, they're also posing us as an opportunity. How do we really create an ecosystem for that? And how do we really ensure that this transition is just? I think one important topic I also want to touch upon is the inclusion, is how do we make it more inclusive, right? And how do we ensure that it is, automotive sector is extremely tilted. It's not, we don't have a gender balance also in this sector. So is this an opportunity for this transition to really bring the just transition, not just from the security measures, but also have the opportunity for more women in the workforce participation, which becomes very, very critical element of this just transition. So those are my initial thoughts, Chaitanya, that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavan. And now maybe I'd actually like to ask Mr. Naveen Munjal to step in. Mr. Naveen Munjal is MD of Hero Electric, one of the biggest electric two-wheeler manufacturers and sellers in India right now. And he's also the president of SMEV, the Society of Manufacturers for Electric Vehicles. So from your perspective in the industry, Mr. Munjal, how big an impact will the e-mobility transition actually have on the automotive aspects, as well as the transport aspects of the workforce? and where do you see the greatest impacts happening?
Thank you, Chaitanya. Pleasure being here today. A lot has actually been covered by, with Madhav starting off on the collaborative efforts, and then Mr. Agarwal talking about the job losses and impact of service and oil exploration, etc., and reskilling. And then Siddharth talking about it, and then of course, Ms. Krishna talking about what Karnataka is doing. So let me just dive a little bit deeper into this whole category of how this is going to have an impact on job losses and what's going to really happen. So when we look at the mobility sector, 62% of all the oil that's consumed is actually consumed by two-wheelers. So that forms a very, very strong base for this whole conversion to happen, and that's exactly what you covered in your presentation as well. Now, the transition from IC to electric, this is going to have an impact on job creation across industries. So what will happen is that the onus will be on the manufacturers, on the OEMs, to actually handhold and guide the way for suppliers, the dealers, subsequent consumers, but with a very, very strong roadmap. And that will be a huge task that's going to be undertaken by the companies themselves. So OEMs will have a very, very responsible position to play here. In a way that e-mobility actually is going to have an impact not just on the automotive sector, but on other sectors as well. So when you look at, for example, connectivity, smart connectivity, telematics, software will play an extremely important role in this whole transition. So while on one hand, you're looking at, potential job losses, which could happen because of the kind of a sector this is, there are going to be numerous opportunities which are going to come up as well. So when you look at OEMs, for example, when you look at across different sectors, there are going to be lightweighting is going to have a very, very important role, which has not had an impact in the auto industry so far. Any company which is manufacturing, for example, I'm just throwing out examples. Any company which is manufacturing, for example, pumps, which are used for IC engine industries, could now actually transition into electric components, electronic components. Precision powertrain companies can start moving towards electronic components. Even companies manufacturing fuel tanks, for example, for the car sector, for the automotive sector, they could look at coolant systems for the batteries, because they are able to fit these fuel tanks into very, very tight spaces. So there is going to be a lot of transition which happens over this. And companies, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 companies will have to transition, will have to reskill their workforce. Companies manufacturing black parts, for example, the chassis, the shock absorbers and the wheels and tires and brakes, etc., there's not going to be much impact there. So basic impact we're going to see is more in anything to do with the engine. But there is time for them to start transitioning into electric as well. Now, R&D is going to play a very, very important role when it comes going forward from here. And India has got a very strong advantage when it comes to R&D. So both existing and new OEMs must engage in EV development R&D work that's going to go in. There is going to be a combination of supply push and demand pull, which is both going to happen. The government has been very proactive. The government has done a wonderful job when it comes to demand creation by the FAME policy, for example. And then not just that, you've got numerous states also creating demand creation, plus there is manufacturing-led incentives, which are pushing the supply creation as well. So both are working in conjunction with each other. Then we've got the PLIs which are in place. Now those PLIs, whether it is for auto component manufacturing, battery manufacturing, or chip manufacturing, the point is that there is a substantial push which is there. Now when you look at the existing workforce, now that's going to require a lot of clear strategy and careful handholding by OEMs and by the tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 and suppliers, etc. Existing skill sets in the auto industry can be applied in these and will have to be refined, but the new jobs that are going to be created will have to be reskilled and will have to be skilled in a way that they can actually handle this. So there is going to be expertise that is going to be required for this. Now, when we start digging a little bit into the technologies in the vehicles, now battery is the most intense part of the EV auto vehicle which comes in, and it could be anything of 24 to 28% value, depending on which vehicle you're looking at. Then, of course, you've got the BMSs and the thermal management systems, which are again new when it comes to electric mobility. Parts like motors and efficient motors, controllers, chargers, drivetrains, etc. These are all important aspects which are going to be completely new. So there is going to be, while we talk about this disruption which is happening and this change which is happening, it also opens up doors for a lot of new industries to come in, whether it is from the manufacturing of the vehicles themselves, the components that come in, the reskilling of the workforce, the reskilling of the roadside mechanics. As a company, I can tell you, we've already reskilled about 8,000 of the roadside mechanics to handle electric. The challenge that existed earlier is these guys didn't understand electric at all. So if you went to them with a small issue, like maybe even a flat tire, they would not be able to fix it. So we've reskilled about 8,000 of them. The idea is that we're going to reskill about 10,000 of them year on year for the next few years. Now that's how we as a company are creating an ecosystem. So every serious, responsible company will actually have an impact to play, will actually have to work beyond just what they're doing within the company. The other part, which is going to be a very, very important part in all of this, is going to be collaboration. So rather than, we believe that this is going to be a highly collaborative model. For example, batteries. Now, batteries are best manufactured by specialist companies, and the chemistry is going to continue changing. Similarly, there are other drivetrain parts which are going to be manufactured by multiple different companies. In an IC company, for example, you held on to the technology which was the engine yourself. In this, you're going to partner with numerous companies. So instead of going vertical, you're actually going to go horizontal in terms of partnerships and whereby jobs are going to be created. You already spoke about 1 crore jobs being created. There's a report out there which talks about 1 crore jobs being created by 2030. Those are the direct employment. Beyond that, there are going to be 5 jobs which are created, which is the indirect employment that's going to come into play. So the opportunities for us in India are absolutely tremendous. The number of vehicles that we've got to get on to the road by 2030 is 102 million vehicles at a base case scenario. Now that's a huge change that's staring at us in the face. And this is going to be a revenue of about $206 billion and an investment opportunity of $192 billion, which is going to be there over the next 7 to 8 years. So tremendous opportunity ahead, and we are extremely optimistic about this sector.
Thank you so much, Mr. Naveen. I'll also come back to you because there are a few other questions, but I'll just go on to the other speakers at this point. This is for Mr. Christian Hochfeld. Mr. Christian, you led a study on the transformation of the automotive. Mr. Christian Hochfeld is the executive director for Agora, which is a German organization that works on research in these spaces. So, Mr. Christian, you led a study on the transformation of the automotive sector jobs as a result of the EV transition for Germany. Now, what sort of impacts do you see in Germany on the automotive workforce that you think could be collateral parallels that you could see in India as well?
Thank you very much, Chaitanya, and I hope you can hear me quite well. Wonderful. Yes. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon from Germany. And it is really exciting to listen to this very informative and very, expertise loaded discussion, which is very similar to the discussion we have in Germany and which we had over the last years. And I can only, stress once again the sentence, there's either a just transition or there will be no transition to EVs. And in this regard, I think I can only highlight, the importance of organizing a just transition. And there was a lot of fear in Germany that as Germany has a very strong automotive sector, that once we shift from the ICE, which was born here, so to say, in Germany 125 years ago, to electric vehicles, that we lose a lot of jobs in the automotive sector. So we had a lot of discussions over the last years, and I think it's very important to sum up what we did in a study which gives an overview about the impacts of this transition, and also possibly policy actions, but also actions in the private sector to make it a successful transition, also with regard to the competitiveness and the size of the automotive sector. And first of all, I think it's very important to mention that and it has been pointed out, it's only, I mean, EV transition is an important transition, but it's only one among very important other transitions at the moment which takes place. It's productivity in the production, it's offshoring, it's definitely automatization, also in the direction of autonomous vehicles, and it's about sharing, so mobility as a service instead of selling privately owned vehicles. So there's a bunch of let's say disruptive developments which have an impact on the automotive sector. And what we found out, summing up and looking at all these trends, is that there are trends which are definitely, driving and supporting the workforce in the automotive industry. It's that market volumes are still growing, that the product mix is, the value per car is getting higher as we have much more software inside. So, the value added is will be increasing. So even the workforce will be increased there, but definitely there is also a loss of jobs with regard to a productivity increase, and in the case of Germany, also relocation of some of the jobs to other parts in Europe or other parts in the world. If it comes to EVs, it's very interesting, and it reflects very well what you have been said, that there will be definitely lost jobs in the in the area of the combustion engine and the whole propulsion system, the old ICE propulsion system. And but those jobs are mainly related to suppliers, be it tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 suppliers. And this is very important because it's much smaller companies than the OEMs at the end. And but these jobs will be compensated by by new jobs in the field of electric motors, the battery system, battery management system, and software, and also energy infrastructure, so charging infrastructure and services which are related to charging infrastructure. And in this regard, all in all, the result is that we can keep the numbers of jobs stable until 2030, which is, I think, it's a good news at the end. But definitely reskilling is so important, and it's not that it's a minor share of the workforce in the automotive sector. It's every second job in the automotive sector has to be reskilled, and I think this shows the size of the challenge, but also the size of the opportunity that we can keep those jobs, especially in automotive sector. Once are trained in their job profile, but others are trained in different job profiles. So this is, I think, one result. The second is that definitely we have to focus on the supporting, especially small and medium-sized companies with this transition, as it will be very difficult for them to do this on their own, because they are not doing this transition themselves, but they are depending on the transition in the automotive, and so on the OEM side. And in this regard, we started already in several federal states which are comparable to your states, like Karnataka, where we have a huge automotive industry, to build strategic platforms for reskilling, but also looking for, can those jobs which maybe are not needed in the automotive sector anymore, but they are very, skill dependent, can they be also used in other sectors which will grow in the region? Because what is very important is to survive or to bridge the skills and the workforce, but also to keep the regions alive. Because what we don't want to see is to have a rust belt like in the US, where the regions are really suffering from losing jobs in the automotive industry. And I think it's also important to keep the regions alive and to see if the automotive industry doesn't play a huge role anymore in a region, in a specific area in Germany, what other businesses, what other industries can be there to take on these jobs and to keep also the workforce in the regions to avoid this. And finally, I think now what we do is to leverage this strategic dialogues on federal states level. In this legislative period, in the next weeks, we will see a national platform for the strategic transformation of the automotive industry, where all the stakeholders come on board. And therefore, I can only applaud to India to take this issue as an issue in this forum for decarbonizing transport, because it's a very important issue, and we can only succeed if we do this in a collaborative way between industry, policymakers, and civil society organizations and scientists. And this is what we do, and we create a national fund, especially for small and medium-sized companies, to get some money. It's a national fund, it's a state-owned fund, creating money for making business models for the small and medium-sized companies for the transition. And the second thing, which we are only starting, is also to leverage private money, because private money and private capital will be the biggest part of this transition, and to also make it possible to support startups with the needed amount of money and needed amount of capital, be it foreign or national capital. That is something which is very important. So at the end, I'm very happy to share the link and the study, which might be also informative for you. It's called the Powering the Automotive Sector and the Automotive Jobs of the Future. And I think that we are working really on very similar issues here in Germany and as well as in India. And I'm very much looking forward for the further discussions and further collaboration in this area, because again, we feel that there are two, roadblocks and for the transition and transformation, which is the fear of losing jobs. I think we did very well here in Germany to push this roadblock away. And the second thing is by decarbonization to keep the equity, right? That we won't hurt people with their mobility behavior if we increase prices for fossil fuels, for example. So equity on the user side will be the next level, which also is an important issue to discuss on such a joint multi-stakeholder forum. Thank you very much for your attention, and great to be with you. It's my great pleasure and honor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Christian. I think a lot of the points you made resonate, like you said, with the Indian experience as well, and how Germany is starting to deal with this will be a great learning opportunity for India also to look into. And we will be sharing the source that you spoke about, the report, with all the attendees as well. Now, Samantha, Ms. Samantha Smith is the director of the Just Transition Center and is a well-known expert on the Just Transition framework across multiple sectors. So pulling you here, Ms. Samantha, from your perspective, as someone who has been studying the just transition in different sectors, how would you define a just transition in the automotive sector, moving to EVs? We've heard about, the maybe growing importance of white collar jobs, which will be coming in. We've heard about some of the regional shifts that might take place within countries. So from these perspectives, if you could speak to what a just transition might look like.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this webinar, and not only to speak, but to learn from the other speakers. Just to say where I work for the International Trade Union Confederation, which represents 200 million organized workers in 162 countries. And in India, our affiliates include unions organizing also in the auto sector, but also associations organizing informal workers. In general, there is one definition of just transition that was negotiated in the United Nations in the International Labor Organization. And that is the definition that we use, and also that governments generally use when they're talking about just transition in the international space, and then also at the national level. And it has a couple of characteristics. One is, we've discussed a lot in this webinar, that no one is left behind. A second is about stakeholder engagement, so this kind of multi-stakeholder forum. But a third is about social dialogue involving unions, governments, and employers, because that's really the place to handle the issues relating to the world of work, including things like skills development. I also just wanted to give a trade union perspective on this transition, which, as many people have pointed out, will cause huge changes in jobs, and also, at least in other countries, we're clear that it is going to involve job losses or losses of existing jobs. So as responsible trade unions, we are very much in support of a transition to lower emission vehicles. We accept that we need to reduce emissions because of climate change and pollution, and that transport is a key part of it. There needs to be a just transition, though, not only for organized workers or for permanent workers, but also for workers on contract and for informal workers. So when we're migrating from internal combustion engines to EVs, there should be plans and arrangements for workers who may lose their jobs or who may need to reskill or skill up. As I mentioned, I've heard some of the other speakers say that we could be talking about somewhere between 20 to 40% job losses in this of existing jobs in this transition. And we see similar numbers in other parts of the world. Roughly a third of the jobs in today's ecosystem for internal combustion engines will disappear. There will be jobs created in other sectors, but not necessarily in the same regions of auto manufacturing, and especially not in the regions that are specializing in supplying parts in the supply chain to the OEMs. So plans should include a few things from our point of view, and these are demands that trade unions have in other major auto producing countries and regions. First of all, skilling and reskilling, which we've talked a lot about, but especially for those who are working in today's supply chains, and reemployment, because one issue that we often see with just transition is that workers get opportunities for skilling and reskilling, sometimes from the current employer. That would be ideal, but there are no new jobs for them to go to. So in addition to skilling and reskilling, must also, as has been done, for example, in Germany and in other countries, South Africa is working on this in its energy transition, have a broader plan for the region, which includes opportunities for people to move from the job they have today to a job of equivalent or better quality in another sector. There are a ton of tools out there for skills matching. We have many examples from around the world about successful labor management government collaboration on skills. And in fact, one of the best results of tripartite social dialogue between unions, employers, and government is understanding exactly what skills people have today and what skills they might need in the future. Where it's not possible for people to get reemployment, and that is also something that we see in other parts of the world, and you need to have plans for compensation, for an appropriate compensation for workers that enables them to get from get through a period of unemployment and to a point where they are reemployed. I think the other point that would be good to stress, and again, something we see from other jurisdictions, this is such a big and important industrial sector in India, but also in other countries, that it's just critical that policies that the government sets up should be, again, based on this tripartite social dialogue between employers, unions, and government, and then this broader stakeholder consultation process. But there are so many jobs involved, direct and indirect, permanent, contractualized, or informal, that in order to manage this job transition with jobs sometimes really concentrated, large numbers of workers in particular regions, you have to have this good dialogue between the workers' representatives, the employers, and the government. I'll just end with an example of something we've been working on with all of the auto unions in Europe, which was basically first an initiative amongst ourselves as trade unions organizing millions of workers in the sector, including the supply chain, but then also in a coalition that we put together with employers and even with some NGOs. And the first and most critical step is exactly what we're talking about in this webinar, which is to map the employment impacts at company, regional, and national levels. And this would include indeed the whole value chain, as well as some of the sectors that will be affected through linkages, so that we understand what skills people have today. We understand how ready different employers or regions, states are to move into this change. And so that we can also plan for some of these skills platforms that we have been discussed in the webinar. A second thing is just to have a platform to exchange best practices, and that's certainly what I've heard today that could potentially be expanded. The auto industry has particular characteristics in different parts of the world, but there are many things that are shared, including some of the employers. And the third is, of course, collective bargaining and social dialogue and transition planning. And just to say that, for example, some of our affiliates in India have collective bargaining with Coal India that is covering permanent and contractual workers, and maybe also now informal workers, that deals with some of these issues about restructuring and closures, changing the business and changing people's skills. That is what collective bargaining is for. So a platform, for that collective bargaining would be very useful. And then finally, you need resources, right, for just transition. You need, even though the cost of retraining and reskilling workers is actually a really small amount, nonetheless, that has to be a part of the equation from employers and from government. And you also will need investment in this big array of flanking industries for the EV transition. So you need charging infrastructure, much more electric power generation, and also the manufacturing supply chain for both of those things. I mean, I'll just close by saying that indeed, there are a lot of jobs in this transition. It's important, though, to recognize that the immediate impact of the transition is that a lot of today's jobs are going to disappear, and the new jobs will come in different sectors where people, as has been pointed out, don't necessarily have the right skills. And so one thing that maybe hasn't been highlighted as much in this discussion is that new EVs of different kinds have so much software. And so there's a huge need for software engineers as part of industry, as well as some of the other things we've talked about the need to make sure that jobs across the battery value chain are good. I think there are good examples in India of informal workers associations that have bargained for agreements on collection and recycling of different kinds of waste, e-waste. One thing that would concern us, though, is that when you're recycling batteries, you're dealing with very toxic chemicals. So one focus that we would suggest is, how do we make the jobs in the recycling value chain, how do we make those jobs safe for workers? Because that you're dealing with some very valuable, but also very, very toxic minerals. So I'll end there, but thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anantha, for bringing that very, very critical perspective to the discussion. I think you've highlighted a lot of things that we do need to account for and that are especially critical for a very informally heavy sector like automotive in a country like India. Thanks. We are at time, but I would like to actually request Siddharth, Mr. Jayesh Ranjan, Ms. Gunjan Krishna, and Mr. Navi Munjal to provide your final reflections on this. So I just request from the session 2 panelists that we take 5 extra minutes so that we can sort of close this up in a decent manner without rushing it. So Siddharth, from your perspective, I'm hoping you're still there. What is the role of national government? What role can the national government and NITI play in enabling some of the things that were spoken about today? Siddharth? While we wait for Siddharth to return, I'm not sure he's there. Mr. Jayesh Ranjan, over to you. Based on what you've heard today, what do you think are the opportunities and risks that Telangana needs to keep in mind going forward on this?
See, the opportunities are plenty because this is a sector which is just kind of scaling up, and this is the best time to make some very strategic interventions. And as was pointed out by other panelists, government does have a very important role to play. And in my opening remarks, I spoke about the government institution for skilling that we have called TASK. So it has been very educative also to recognize the fact that if one is not very strategic in one's outlook, the questions of justness, equity, fairness, etc., all those can be frittered away. One can lose sight of all those dimensions. So that way it has been very educative. And I'm sure I'll pass on all this feedback to my colleague, the TASK CEO, and the kind of skilling programs, etc., that he will design will take care of some of these requirements. But as I said, we do have a very important role to play. The government, both at the national level and the state governments, have an important role to play. But as I said, if you are really creating a very comprehensive ecosystem, you have to look at the entire range of skills that are available, right from very high-end, very skill-focused kind of responsibilities vis-a-vis the very basic responsibilities. So I guess we should not lose sight of the fact that the whole range has to be catered to.
Absolutely. And the role of state governments, I completely agree. And many state governments have also started actually putting in place employment policies as part of their EV policies. And so I think that states are fully cognizant of the need. Ms. Gunjan Krishna, to you as well, are there any examples of maybe more inclusive workforce development from Karnataka, be it from e-mobility or other sectors? What are some lessons that you are looking to bring from best practices to bear in this space?
Yeah. So what government of Karnataka is looking at is creating the policy paradigm, because ultimately we act as facilitators and we nudge people through the policies. And the other important aspect is bringing all the stakeholders together on one platform, learn from them, and then work out, because this is going to have a major displacement also of the existing ecosystem of the ICE engine that exists, and how we can manage that well. When it comes to the, how the equity in employment and equity in when we're talking about the EV sector. So EV sectors, both looking at the demand side and the supply side, if we were to, then we are creating from the labor perspective a lot of simplification of the labor laws, ensuring that women are given more representation. They are allowed to work in the night shifts, increasing the number of hours that the part-time that they can, overtime that they can do in quarterly fashions. So these are some of the things. And also we are looking at it that how we can create certain incentives, say for example, for the poorer section of the societies, which are looking at, their total cost of ownership can be brought down and they can be able to own the vehicle. So that aspect is a demand kind of incentives that we are looking at it. We have sent one paper already, to the government, and looking at, if that gets approved, then we'll have, maybe from the weaker sections, there are certain kind of subsidy, not across the board. And this is, and the other thing is that, of course, the equity part also comes through, uniformity across. So maybe clusters approach, and that could be more inclusive when it comes to the regional development. So we are not just having Bangalore centric. Of course, Bangalore is important. Our cluster would be here, but then we are having Tatas and doing the major EV thing in Hubli, Dharwad, and we can look at, how we can nudge the companies to look at various areas. The battery cell manufacturing can happen in other places. So these are the, in trying to bring in equity within the employment, but not harming the business at all. Because the idea is that the EV should grow, the ecosystem should become, and if it going from the major centers to the hinterland, then let that be. But having said that, giving more focus on R&D, ensuring that the testing, so the ecosystem in its place, and we already have got ATS has set up a testing center where they will be looking at, number of things, for certification, verification, for calibration and other things. So that's the approach that Government of Karnataka. And thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And finally, Mr. Naveen Manjal, your reflections on this. I think the initiative that you spoke about from the point of view of Hero Electric, already training some informal mechanics and all who transition to EVs, actually is exemplifying some of the things we spoke about. So from your takeaways from this conversation today.
So, Chaitanya, as I was saying earlier, it's a responsibility. There's a very big responsibility on the OEMs and the supply chain below, actually, to start reskilling the workforce and to create the job opportunities. While that's the case, this is going to be a PPP partnership. So this is going to be a public-private partnership. The government has a very important role to play. One of the critical roles that the government actually has in helping us actually get access to manpower. This is still a sunrise sector. This is still a new industry. And for it to have a level of success, we need to get access to people. If we don't get access to people, we will have a challenge in our hands. Now, while we are doing this at our end from a company perspective, so we've tied up with numerous organizations, one of them being the American Indian Foundation. So AIF, we are working with them to get access to, the mechanics on the roadside mechanics, plus get access to manpower, which we are reskilling and retraining. We've already tied up as a company with 7 ITIs at this point of time, where we are pulling in people from there, we are training them, enabling them to actually be able to get jobs in the EV sector. Of course, the first this thing is that they come and join us, but nevertheless, we're reskilling them, we're creating that kind of a skill set where they can get employment anywhere. Now, a very important factor besides just the reskilling and getting them access to manpower for this whole sector to take off is also getting access to capital for companies, getting access to good R&D. There was a DRDO project which was done earlier where they opened up their patents to batteries, for example. Now, that's a phenomenal one. That's outstanding. There is a lot of work which has been done in the industry, in various public sector companies and across industries in India on different aspects, whether it's the chargers, the controllers, the BMSs, and the batteries, etc. Open it up to a wider spectrum. The PLIs that we're coming in, we've got various policies which are there. They need to be more inclusive rather than exclusive. So they need to be wider and they need to be unidirectional. And another very, very important factor for a lot of the startups is the big challenge they face, especially in the sector, and that's there in across sectors, is because this is a very capital intensive industry, automotive. But access to capital is very, very difficult. So access not just to financing of the vehicles and the dealerships, etc., but even for companies who are starting up, because it is to an extent, it's a asset light model as against the conventional industry. So getting access to capital is a very tough one. So there is a lot of work to be done. And whatever numbers that we're talking about could be hugely accelerated, provided some of these things fall in place. So whatever we've spoken to so far, whatever numbers we were talking about, conversion, etc., that's a base case scenario, and that can be accelerated. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists for this really rich discussion. I think we brought in a bunch of different perspectives from all from industry, from the trade unions, from our colleagues in other countries for some peer exchange, as well as from government, and it's been it's really a first fruitful discussion on this topic. And now I'd like to invite the panelists of the second session to please switch on your videos. Thank you so much, panelists, for the first session. We were very grateful to have you. Thank you. And I apologize already to the panelists of the second session. We're very sorry for having gone over and delayed the beginning of the second session. But the second session on skill development in the EV industry, I hand over to my colleague Garima to take forward this very, very important discussion as well.
Thank you so much, Chaitanya. Hi, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of this webinar, which is on skill development in electric vehicle industry. We all, I think, agree that skill development is very important to any industry. It is a basic infrastructure for industrial growth. But it is even more critical when we talk about an industry which is going through a transformational or transition phase. And how we skill today defines the future of the industry tomorrow. And that is what we are going to discuss in session 2. And we have with us a panel of experts who are highly experienced in their respective fields. And we have a very good mix of panelists with us. We have experts from industry, academia, think tanks, and those who have done on-ground implementation of the projects. Let me quickly introduce you to our panel. We have with us Ms. Divya Jain, who's a program manager with UNDP. Divya has worked on various skill development projects, including EV skill development, on-ground implementation of these projects. We have with us Jay Bharti, who is founder and CEO of MOVO Social Initiatives Foundation. MOVO is training women in driving for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. We have Navonil Das, who is technical advisor Indo-German program for vocational educational and training at GIZ. We have with us Professor Niharika Vora, who is Vice Chancellor for Delhi Skill and Entrepreneurship University. So DSU has been one of the leading universities taking charge of developing courses around new technologies, including electric vehicles. And we have with us Vani Rinki, who is AVP of Business Development at Euler Motors. Vani will bring to us much needed industry perspective. A very warm welcome to all our panelists and audiences, participants who have joined us on Zoom as well as YouTube. I would like to thank all our panelists for joining us today for this discussion and provide their insights. Before we move to panel discussion, I would like to make a quick presentation just to give perspective to all the participants about our discussion. I hope
Garima, we can keep the presentation really short and we can get into panel discussion if we just want to do 2-3 minutes. Yeah.
Sure. So the reason we prepared this presentation, I want all the participants to understand why we need skill development around electric mobility. The first reason is there's huge change in technology as we are moving towards electric mobility, and this change in technology has mandated that we skill and reskill our workforce to be able to take this transition. Again, the second reason is the scale of electric vehicle industry is very small currently, but as we scale up tomorrow, we need large scale skill development projects to be able to take that scaling up of the industry. The third reason is currently a lot of OEMs in the industry are training their workforce internally, but as the industry scales up tomorrow, we need large scale projects so that OEMs and other industry players can focus on growth. And also these skill development internal trainings are not very cost effective for industry players. So we need to take that burden off their shoulder, and a state level or national level program is needed for skill development. The fourth reason is current lack of skill is impacting the productivity of the industry. So a lot of industry players, they train their resources internally, and after 3-4 months of on-the-job training is when the employees are able to attain productivity, which of course impacts the growth of this fast-moving industry. And last but not least, we need to address the fear of change because of this change in technology and lack of right skilling. Currently, there is a fear of job loss in the industry, and if we have to address this fear, we must have large-scale multi-stakeholder approach-related training projects in the country. In the interest of time, I will very quickly just talk about some of the challenges that industry is facing. EV, as we move towards electric mobility, we just don't need learning, but we also need unlearning. For example, the way you deal with safety when an ICE vehicle catches fire is very different when an electric vehicle catches fire. So for decades, we have built these habits, and we need to break these habits to be able to more effectively deal with electric vehicles. This is not a new point, but we currently have lack of women participants, and we are looking forward to address this as we move towards electric mobility. Since the industry is new, there is lack of industry standards around job roles, curriculum, training, methodologies. So that is one of the challenges that we need to address when we prepare the roadmap for skill development in EV industry. And lastly, the market size of the industry is still small, and we are into sort of chicken and egg situation, whether to start large scale projects, skill development projects or not, given the industry size is low. However, the industry is growing at a very, very fast rate, and the situation will be different just a couple of years down the line. I think Chaitanya has already explained in the presentation how our move towards electric mobility is impacting the entire value chain of the industry, right from R&D to repair and maintenance. And in the interest of time, I will not go into the details of the value chain. And lastly, not just the value chain, a lot of new components are being added to the industry as we are moving towards electric mobility. So for instance, the traditional fuel, fossil fuel will disappear from the value chain, and EV charging stations is something which is a completely new component being added to the industry. Before we move to the panel discussion, I would request all the participants to post their questions in Q&A segments, and based on time availability, we will try to address some of the questions. And my request to panelists, if we can limit our comments to 5 minutes. My first question is to you, Vani. You come from industry, and you have spent some years in electric mobility industry now. So in your opinion, what skill gaps is the currently facing, is the industry currently facing, and how is the industry managing skill development at the moment?
Sure. So thanks for giving me this opportunity, Garima, WRI and NITI Aayog. Happy to be here to share my thoughts about the industry and the challenges which we are facing. So definitely there is a skill or a talent gap in the industry today. Automotive is basically an OEM for light commercial electric vehicles, and we build for India, by India. And this is the motto which we are going by. We ourselves are looking to absorb thousands of engineers over the next 2 years, not only to design electric vehicles, but also to commercialize them. It's a chicken and egg problem, you know, like you also mentioned, that the current skill which is available in the market, the automobile professionals, they need to be upskilled. Currently, how we are solving this is we basically are training on the job. There are certain R&D developments which are happening, and we validate, test, some fail, some don't, and we literally are writing out the EV handbook. Most OEMs like ourselves would be seeing the first product life cycle over the next 3 to 4 years, which will define the material which will be used to train the people in the future. So currently, we would be doing a lot of on-the-job training. However, we are in conversation with a lot of people from academia, and happy to get introduced in case anyone is interested to, where we would collaborate for curriculum design and what exactly as industry we know can be accommodated, what we can share so that the approximately 35 lakh engineers which are graduating every year, they could be upskilled to be EV ready from day one. The curriculum definitely needs to change in the colleges so that 4 years hence, 5 years hence, we do have professionals who are EV ready. So this is basically how we are handling it today and plan to handle it in the future. Electric vehicles by definition need to be high performance. They need to be redesigned from scratch. It is not, the energy efficiency of the battery. How will that kind of play out? That it's a high torque vehicle. So what kind of components need to be replaced there? A lot of solutions available in the market are existing ICE vehicles just placed with a battery pack. And that was probably the easiest go-to-market strategy for most people. However, if we don't cater to this now, change the mindset and cater to this now, it's going to lead to a problem in the future. So this is how Euler Motors as an OEM is kind of looking into this. And we would be happy to collaborate with other professionals, other people from academia to kind of resolve this issue.
So Vani, in terms of skill gaps, we know the entire value chain is getting impacted. So which skills exactly do you think industry is currently facing the gap in? Is it the mechanics? Is it in the R&D of vehicles?
So see, first of all, we need to design the vehicles. That is where R&D would start. So definitely there's a gap there. Now that commercialization of vehicles has started, the service and vehicle uptime, etc., becomes important, where service engineers are also need to be upskilled. So I would say it's basically the whole supply chain or the whole product life cycle where skill addition needs to happen. Definitely, people have been building ICE vehicles for 70, 80 years and the technology has evolved. The same is going to repeat with electric vehicles, that today we are using some technology, we might be using lithium ion, tomorrow what will it be, and 70, 80 years hence, we don't know what it will be. We need to quickly adapt so that we can upskill and ensure that the talent is available.
Sure. Thanks, Vani, for sharing that with us. My next question is to Professor Niharika. Professor Niharika, you heard Vani that industry is currently facing skill gaps. So there definitely is a need to have a large-scale skill development initiatives or projects. But if we think from educational institutes' point of view, they need to have a business plan. They need to have students who apply for this course, and it's not a easy decision to make whether or not to start a training in the EV space. So for a university like DSU, how is that decision made? What are the challenges and what things do you consider while making that decision?
So thank you for asking the question, Kariman, and thank you, Vani, for offering to help any university to develop such a course. I think for us, given the fact that we have a number of diploma courses, we also have a fairly active course on, let's say, automobile engineering, right? And it just makes sense for the automobile engineer not to just learn about the diesel engine or the petrol engine, but also to learn about EV, right? So again, I think yes, it takes effort to rejig the curriculum. It makes sense, but I think that is the whole point of an educational institution, that we work in tandem with where the industry is going. So if the industry is going to be producing and the consumers and the public is going to be consuming more of this, then it is just our responsibility, and I think our in the good of our students, that they actually learn the details of the EV vehicles. And of course, EV vehicles is it's not just about the engine. There's the whole infrastructure that needs to be put in, and the people who put in the infrastructure, people who can maintain that infrastructure, people who can improve that infrastructure are all, are required to be trained as we speak. So as a university, I think for us, the obvious solution has been, and we recognize that Delhi especially is quite, quite aggressive about its EV targets. And therefore, we would like to be able to support the students in their learning. So as we speak, we are definitely rejigging the curriculum. We are definitely adding the EV portions to our, EV aspects of automobile industry to our curriculum. And as most of you would know, it's not easy to not only change, but it's also very difficult to find the right faculty to teach it. So I think the attempt has not only to be put it in the curriculum, but also to help to really partner with the industry to train the trainers, to train the faculty at this point of time. So I think we see it as a very important addition to our courses. We see it as something that has to go into our electrical course, our electronic course, and our automobile course that we run for students. And the numbers that we run are fairly high. So we're hopefully, and we're not just saying that we will do a 3-month short-term skilling program in EV, but this will be engineers, diploma engineers who would be trained in the technology and then also be able to work with the EV technology. That's how we are thinking about it at this point of time.
Thanks, Professor Niharika, for your comments. I think you brought out a couple of important points. First is any academic institute has to work in tandem with industry, keep an eye on their requirements, and once there is enough demand, then work on creating courses around that for skill development. And secondly, a lot of participation from industry is required. EV is a new industry, and we definitely need train the trainer approach to be able to create a viable curriculum for skill development. My next question is for Divya. Divya, as part of UNDP, you have worked on various skill development projects, not just on electric mobility, but other projects as well. And currently, I understand that your work is focused more on electric mobility. So would you like to share some of your observations of these on-ground implementation of EV skill development projects in India?
Sure, Garima. Thanks a lot, and so happy to be a part of this really experienced panel. I feel a bit nervous, but I would definitely like to share the experiments we have done with youth and skill development. And I just want to take a step back and mention that non-traditional livelihoods when we talk about an EV sector and similar tie-ups with other private sector and manufacturing sector industry has been an important part and success when it comes to non-traditional livelihoods. And this is very important when now the sort of binary between rural and urban is transiting, where a lot of rural migration is now happening to peri-urban and urban areas. And you go to Manesar or you go to outskirts of Bangalore, Hyderabad, Siddipet, the kind of migration you see of very, very young people, it's actually very, it's really stark, right? Because people do have aspirations and the kind of rural income that people have now, it's not enough to match the aspirations all the families have in terms of just living a better quality of life, and that really pushes the economy and sector like ours, and whether it's a university or a Delhi government, which must be congratulated for their EV policy and the kind of tremendous work they have been doing. Right, and other states also. I think Karnataka is also following now Delhi's paths in some ways when it comes to EV policy. I think what's really important for us to understand is that there are a lot of synergies between skill development of youth in the EV sector and other sectors, because in terms of the kind of anxiety and questions young people have, the confusions young people have that, oh, so, I'm going to get this training, but what is it that I'm going to get out of this training? How am I going to find a job? How, what is the route to find the right kind of company? How much will I get paid? Do I need to learn additional skills? Is this good enough? So these are the questions which young people obviously, struggle with, and particularly when it's a new sector. Often we don't know what kind of stipends and salaries this sector can offer, because it's such a growing sector. As I think in the previous session also, people mentioned that it's a tremendous opportunity, but we are all trying to figure out how much and how big is the opportunity, and how many youth we can really train and how many we can really place. So while it's really optimistic and it's a big thing, that's big transition that's happening. I have interacted with a lot of youth, both in our Bangalore project as well as in our project in Delhi NCR, where youth have been very, very interested in getting into EV sector training. There are, MAPS, there's Yamaha, who is promoting young people to get into this kind of work. UNDP in particular now has been focusing on NAPS work. So we are promoting a lot of apprenticeship related work through private sector partnership, where we are onboarding training providers into NAPS platform, so that a stipend could also be given to young people while they are learning on job. So that has been a very, very interesting way of for us to learn and for us to also support youth. I must mention this one thing, that when youth are getting trained into automobile sector in general, EV sector right now is looked as an additional skill. So as Niharika ma'am very well said, that it's not only, it shouldn't be about running a 2-month or a 3-month program, but it should be about really full-fledged developing more than, just 3-4 job roles. I think that's going to become so important in the near future, because we don't want young people to only look at it as one of the options, but it can actually be a full-fledged career option for people. Once that kind of demand and supply is matched. One last point very quickly I want to mention is that the sector is still very fragmented and in terms of social inclusion, because factory settings are mostly in far outskirts, whether you look at Delhi NCR or even in Karnataka in our project context. And it's very tough for us to involve young girls into these kind of program implementation. So we need to understand and figure out job roles or overall safety mechanism where we can involve more and more girls, and there can be more safety for everyone to work in these kind of sectors. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Divya. I think you have highlighted 2-3 very, very important points. One is, it is very important to create awareness among the youth who will be the future of this industry. So currently, because of lack of awareness, a lot of young people tend to think of electric mobility as a secondary option and not as full-fledged career option. So that needs to be changed. And secondly, I think private industry partnership, especially around providing training opportunities as a trainer and on-the-job experience, is very, very important. Now, my next question is to Mr. Navonil. Mr. Navonil, you have also been part of a lot of on-ground implementation of projects around electric mobility. And when we talk about courses in electric mobility, there are 2 types of courses. One is long-term courses, which probably are of 2-3 years long, but we also have short-term courses. And since electric mobility is a very, very fast-growing industry, we cannot deny the importance of short-term courses as low-hanging fruits. And you have been engaged in few such projects. So would like to hear from you about the importance of short-term courses and any important best practices that you would like to share.
Well, hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity. As you know that I'm representing GIZ. GIZ is a service provider in the field of international cooperation for sustainable development and education work. So we are working in more than 120 countries worldwide for more than 50 years now, and economic development, employment promotion, and promotion of vocational and education, technical education is one of our priorities. So in India, I'm representing a program which is called the Indo-German Program for Vocational Education and Training, or IGVET. IGVET aims at bringing stakeholders from public and private sector together to facilitate the creation and improvement of cooperative workplace-based VET in India. So we basically work in a in a cluster model. We select one location based on the demand from the government or the private parties, and then we decide which sector to work on that in that sector. Like we have an automobile sector in Aurangabad, and then in Bangalore we have electronics and manufacturing cluster. We have a retail cluster in Mumbai. I mean, all these have started. We have started these clusters back in 2016-17. Right now we are in the phase 2 of IGVT program. In phase 2 of the IGVT program, we have more and more kind of replicating our models, our pilot models from one cluster to another cluster. So during this whole thing, we had also developed an e-mobility cluster in Kolkata, because the government of West Bengal was very keen that there should be a training session for the students of Kolkata, of West Bengal, where they can they can learn and about this training program, and then they can implement, they can get jobs. So what we did, like we have a similar program which is we call at IGEN, which is Indo-German Energy Program. So IGN and IGVT has jointly collaborated with the Indian Institute of Technology and Bombay, and we have developed a syllabus for syllabus, content, the lab manual, the list of equipments and instruments, everything for polytechnic students who are at the final year of their course, like in the 5th and 6th semester. So we had done a very in-depth analysis and review of the existing courses that we have in ITIs, polytechnics, in engineering colleges, in other vocational and educational courses everywhere within India, outside India. And based on this survey, we have formed the structure of the syllabus, and then we have shared it with a wide range of stakeholders, which includes industries, discoms, sector skill councils, government regulatory bodies, academia, obviously OEMs and all. And with their feedback, we have revised the syllabus and then we embarked on the developing the content part. So as I mentioned, the syllabus and the content covered both the theory and the practical part. So any student who will go through this EV course will be able to do the following few things, like analyzing of the architecture of the EV, then explain the working concept of the EV, then design or size the drivetrain for EV, battery and charging stations, analyze and troubleshoot the basic faults in different EV components and charging system, then repair and retrofit different components of EV, analyze the impact of EV integration in distribution system, both the traditional as well as in the RE, the renewable energy one, and explain the concept of EV except the concept of EV to anyone. So we are not only focusing on the repair maintenance part. There are like 7 topics covered in the syllabus. So which covers the introduction to EV, then the EV components, which basically components the motor drive technologies, battery storage technologies, battery charging, battery management system, power electronics, control system, and sizing of the driving system. Then we have also covered the EV charging infrastructure, EV grid integration, EVs and RE integration, EV maintenance and repair and service, and high voltage safety. So this syllabus is ready. Actually the content and everything is completely ready, and it is with us. And I was listening to you, and when Madam Gunjan Krishnan was talking about that in Karnataka they are looking for syllabuses for polytechnic and ITIs and all. So we thought maybe after the session, I mean, we will definitely approach her, and because this is in public domain, this syllabus is in public domain. We have already applied for AICTE approval, and we will get this approval in the next couple of weeks or maybe in a month. So that is open to all, open to everyone. It will be in public domain. Anyone can take it up. But this syllabus is talking about the four-wheelers. But as you in the first session also, when someone mentioned about these e-rickshaws, or we call it in Kolkata Toto, or e-cycles, e-bikes. So we have also a separate program with an organization called there is an educational mission. I mean, it's a national level educational mission. So they have created taking these kind of industry demands from different organizations, like who are manufacturing these e-rickshaws or e-cycles, because during lockdown, e-cycle is something that has come up in a huge way in Kolkata or in West Bengal, because people have started, because the public transport were all closed down and they don't wanted to spend money to buy a vehicle or something, but they bought those e-cycles. I mean, it's an kind of engines fitted cycle which they are using. From moving around. So for this e-cycle, what we did, like this educational mission is already developed a course, already developed a syllabus. They are training students during the lockdown. They have trained and placed more than 200 students. So we are working with them. We are trying to standardize their syllabus. We are trying to standardize their lab. We are training their trainers, and so that they can get more students. They can train and place more students. So that way, GIZ, we definitely understand the need of short-term courses, and because most of our working, most of our trainings, wherever we are doing, we're mostly focusing on the short-term courses. Even for this polytechnic training, this is not like a 3 years course. We are this polytechnic training syllabus that we have developed, it's for automobile engineering students as a part of their last semester or last 2 semesters. But we can also introduce it for electrical, mechanical, electronics diploma students. They can also learn this and they can get jobs. And this syllabus is highly customizable, highly modular. So you can take out modules from it and you can introduce it to ITIs. We are already talking with the Automobile Sector Skill Council for making it into small modules for or other courses for short-term courses. And this other program that I was talking about with regarding this e-cycles or e-rickshaws. So we have a plan once this is kind of a pilot phase, maybe after 6 months or 1 year, because we are going to focus more and more. IGVT program will going to focus more and more green jobs, green technologies, green TVET and all. So EV being a very important part of this whole green ecosystem. So we are planning to introduce these courses into the other parts of the country. So I hope I could complete everything within the time I was given. And once again, thank you so much, WRI, for giving me this opportunity for presenting our work. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namonel. I think you have highlighted a very, very important point that curriculum design, syllabus design is very, very important. When we talk about electric vehicles, particularly because it is a completely new industry, there is no standardized curriculum already available in India. And secondly, I'll take an example. If we talk about repair and maintenance of 2-wheelers, it could be completely different from repair and maintenance of 3-wheelers. So curriculum designed for 2-wheelers may not be completely applicable for 3-wheelers. So we have to take into considerations all those nuances while designing the curriculum. So thank you so much for sharing those points with us. My next question is for Jay. Jay, traditionally, automobile industry has neglected the role and participation of women completely. How do you see that changing with electric mobility? Jay, you are on mute. If you could please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thank you, Garima, and thank you, WRI, for bringing all the stakeholders together. I'm very glad that we are talking about inclusivity in EV. To answer your first question, the first thing I think is probably this kind of a webinar or an in-person meeting, it would have happened 5 or 6 decades ago. It would have been filled with all men. And that was the root cause why it did not encourage more women to be in the sector. And fast forward to now, in today's webinar, we have seen either in the first panel or even now, we have seen enough representation of women at different levels in the leadership roles. So that itself is very, very encouraging, because when women are at these leadership roles, they sure will bring in policies or build solutions which will engage generations of women to step into these sectors. That is the first and very key change which has been happening over the past 2 or 3 years. And like you said, yes, women were not there at all, let us say, though it is 1 or 2%, it's quite negligible. And one major reason could be the, from the education itself. Typically, when it was ITIs or any technical based diplomas, they were all been taken up or given to men in specific and not to women. And of course, we are now at a stage where a lot of engineering automobile engineering courses girls are encouraged, they themselves are coming up and taking these courses, but still there is a long gap. And like rightly, mentioned towards at the beginning of the webinar, where we say that India, the market of two-wheelers and three-wheelers especially is quite high compared to the other vehicle segments. And while this also has a lot of skills which are required, but one good thing is the components which are in the EV vehicles, be it two-wheelers, three-wheelers, or even beyond, is quite less compared to the traditional ICE vehicles. So that again gives a lot of opportunity for women to be a part of this entire skilling of component management. And where I see a lot of potential for women is also after sales. Like Divya mentioned, most of the plant-based or the industries are based little in the remote areas or far away from the urban spaces. So unfortunately, that is a challenge for a lot of women to get into those roles. But what happens after sales is the basic repairs and maintenance. And it is not a very highly technical, it doesn't need high technical knowledge to be able to do that. And the duration of the courses is much less compared to regular skilling courses. So earlier we had to do a lot of apprenticeship programs to involve women into most of the livelihood-based roles. But if somebody wants to learn two-wheeler and three-wheeler repair or maintenance kind of a thing, the skilling duration is also quite less. So that is very, very encouraging as well for a lot of women to at least be a part of this fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you so much, Chair, for sharing those important points. In the interest of time, I just want to, before we close the session, I want to ask one last question to all our panelists. I think it is very, very critical for India as a country to design a roadmap, a thoughtful roadmap to skill development in electric vehicle industry, so that we are able to seamlessly and effectively train our workforce for this industry. So I'll ask this question to Divya and then to Professor Niharika. What reflections or what best practices do you think as a country we should adopt for creation of this roadmap? Over to you, Divya.
Thanks, Garima. So it's going to sound a bit cliched, but I think we really need a lot of collaboration. I think Delhi, Karnataka, similar, little bit of movement now in Telangana as well is showing some hope, and there are other states also which will, pick up, like Gujarat, etc. And I think we really, and the thing is that this is one sector where government is also positive, private sector is positive, and we really need to grab these opportunities and collaborate, whether it is coming to research. And panelists have mentioned really interesting stuff around curriculum as well. So I think we are definitely moving in the right direction, where we are able to identify job roles, very clear-cut job roles, clear-cut curriculum. And I think there is a solid awareness around that we need a higher sense of social inclusion because it has to be for the future of the country, which is, our youth. So I think those kind of realization at broad level, at high level also exist. So this is one sector I feel needs a top-down approach to a bottom-up approach. It needs both because this is a new sector. We do need solid research. We do need, solid technical work and R&D work. And we do need, people who come from other side of skill development and who can help us with this. Just to mention that, right, like at district level, there are factory owners associations, there are MSMEs. There are small other industries associations. At the end of the day, they are the one who have the greatest access to youth and youth exposure. So what kind of tie-ups we can do with these district level entities actually to reach out at scale, whether it is training or whether it is reaching out to youth. And because we cannot run parallel system for too long for any new sector. At the end, we have to integrate it with existing colleges, existing ITIs, step up other ITIs. And so these are the things which we really need for a collaborative, so that it is at scale, because we do need scale. Otherwise, it doesn't work for a country like India. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Divya. I think collaborative approach and inclusion of youth is very, very important. Now I'll move to Professor Niharika Vora. Professor Vora, I think when it comes to skill development for electric mobility, the important role of educational institutes cannot be it's very important and cannot be neglected. So when designing a roadmap for skill development for electric mobility in India, what do you think are the things that should be kept in mind and or best practices to be adopted?
So one of the things is that I don't think this has to be one university's job. I think several universities have to work together, because we are not speaking about, reskilling, training people only for a small city or for one state. I think it's important that we do that skilling is more widespread. And for that, the best minds of the in this sector possibly need to come together to develop a curriculum. And then, of course, everybody transacts it differently, uses different methods. That's one part of it. So I personally think that some of the best minds in EV, automobile engineering, working in some of the best institutions need to come together to actually create a core curriculum. The second thing I think is this training, like many other engineering training, must not only happen in a classroom. There has to be good and almost like a half practical hands-on learning, as well as the theory behind it. So we don't want just hands-on, but we want the person to be able to conceptualize, but we don't want just theoretical tigers. We want people to actually be able to do things with their hand. So the learning is deeper, the work will be better. And I think as many of us have possibly known that sometimes for many of us, our favorite our favorite person to fix our car is possibly somebody who's not even gone finished school, but because they've practiced it so much and because they have learned it from one person to the other, their skill is very high. So how can I replicate that in this college, in the university, is an important best practice that we possibly need to put in place. And as long as we are able to do that, I think we should do well.
Thank you so much, Professor Niharika. I think it is, as you mentioned, that it is very, very important to have hands-on experience, particularly for industry which is new and which students have not probably may not have seen electric vehicles before. So it's very important for them to look at vehicle and work on vehicle with a hands-on approach. So thank you for sharing that point. I will now move to Vani. Vani, if you can, I would ask the same question to you from industry perspective. And I think almost all the panelists have mentioned the importance of collaborative approach, how industry should participate. So from industry perspective, would you like to mention any best practices which we should adopt while preparing the roadmap for EV skill development in India?
So I think Professor Niharika has mentioned a very valid point, that it is the skill which comes with practice, right? I think from an industry perspective, I would just like to mention that I believe that R&D, which is happening, and academia, they should work in tandem. If there is a new technology which is being developed close to commercialization, the earlier we kind of impart it to our students, the more workforce ready we would be with respect to that skill. So this is the only thing which is coming to my mind as of now.
Yeah, I think Vani, the importance of R&D, we all understand, and we need a collaborative approach there as well. And I think today electric mobility industry is at nascent stage, and a lot of technological development is yet to come, and R&D will definitely play an important role there. Now, I would ask same question to Jay. Jay, what's your take on this question of best practices that India should look at while adopting, while working on a roadmap for skill development?
Yeah, I would, while all the panel members added more perspective, I think I would still go back to the inclusion aspect of it. Now we have a wonderful opportunity to make it very inclusive space. And, I was reading an article in Net Zero where there are going to be millions of jobs in this industry, and let women be a part of it. And for that, everybody needs to consider engaging women, right from education to skilling them and to giving them better opportunities to work in this, to work in this workforce. So a lot of policy level interventions need to happen both from the government side and also collaboration with the civic society organizations, because like Divya mentioned earlier, these are the people who are directly into the society and have a lot of roots in in identifying the people who need to be developed, like in the economic perspective or the social perspective. So I think it has to be a collaborative effort, and everybody needs to think about adding an inclusion at every stage.
Yeah, Jay, I think as we are transitioning to electric mobility, it provides us an opportunity to undo the wrong practice of excluding women from industry, I would say, which has traditionally been done for many, many years. It's an opportunity to undo that now with transition to electric mobility. So Namunil, same question to you, and you bring in a lot of experience from on-ground implementation of projects and curriculum design. What best practices should we as a country adopt as we start focusing on skill development?
Okay. So I'm totally agreeing with other points that the other panel members have put forward. Like inclusion is very much important. Sorry, and this participatory approach from both the private and the public sector, that is also very much important. One more thing that I just want to mention here, that when we started this research of understanding what is the present situation of EV, first of all, we could not find anything. But when we tried to understand what is the situation of other syllabuses, we found out that many of our these syllabuses are very much kind of outdated. So keeping an open mind and updating both from the government side as well to of this any new syllabus or any course that you are introducing to the system, you need to keep updating it very soon or very fast, because right now, especially for EV, those who are from the industry, they will know that things are changing very fast. Maybe in the next 2 years, we will have a completely new set of technology, new set of battery system and everything. So then it will be difficult for us to again include everything and change everything. So we have to keep ourselves updating ourselves, and we have to keep an open mind. I just want to give a very small example here. Today morning, I went for a meeting with a power generation and distribution company in Kolkata, CESC. Maybe you know them. CESC runs several charging stations in Kolkata because there are so many. I think around 130 buses, electric buses, are running in Kolkata. So they have created this charging station for this buses. So we basically wanted to talk to them to understand their need of training and how we can help them with our syllabus, with our content and everything. And then they proposed to us, okay, fine, that is fine, we'll definitely work on that. But also that since there is a power generation and power distribution company, and they deal right now, they're dealing with cybersecurity, they're dealing with big data, they're dealing with phishing scams, because people of their customers are getting messages that your power will be will be cutting down your power if you don't pay all this number, and then they're losing money. So they're saying that now we need to train our people on these things. So can you please help us? So that is something that was not I was expecting, that a power generation company is asking to train their employees on big data security and phishing and these kind of things. So that taking an example from that instance, I just want to say that something might come up tomorrow. So we have to be really open and inclusive about that change of the syllabus, change of the technology and the change of whole ecosystem as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Navonil. I think not just electric mobility is a fast growing industry, it is also a fast changing industry, and we need to be agile and we need to remain open for changes even when it comes to curriculum and syllabus design for the industry. So they're very, very important, and thanks for bringing that to highlight. And I think we have already crossed our scheduled time by 15 minutes. And I will just highlight a few things as closure of this session. I think as all our panelists mentioned that it is utmost important to have a multi-stakeholder collaboration approach where academia, industry, government participation is required for a successful skill development of the industry. Second important point, I think, is with electric mobility, it's our chance to correct the imbalance that has been there with traditional automobile and transport industry. It's an opportunity for starting to include various sections of society who were earlier not part of this industry. And I think, as mentioned in session 1, it is very, very critical to measure the impact of transition to electric mobility on job losses, on creation of new jobs, and keeping that in mind, designing the entire job rules and curriculum for this new industry that will help us strategize and set a clear roadmap for skill development. So I would like to thank all our panelists for sharing their insights with us and for spending time for this discussion with us. I would also like to thank all our participants who have joined us on Zoom and YouTube for their time. And I would like to thank NITI, Aayog, and our partner organizations under NDCTIA initiative for all their support in organizing this webinar. And last but not least, I would like to thank our communications team, which has been working tirelessly and taking care of every detail in organizing this event. Thank you so much, all of you. And WRI-India and our entire team looks forward to many more such enriching discussions in future. And thank you so much.